Good morning and welcome once again to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And now, with no further ado, I will continue our reading and discussion of the book The Global Vatican by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney, who served during the George W. Bush administration, who was a Vatican insider, who was a Bush insider, and who reveals in this book just how much influence the Vatican, the papacy, the Antichrist of the Bible has to do with American foreign and domestic policy. And not only that, but the international relations. And we concluded yesterday on page 231, and I was about to begin the second to the last paragraph as we concluded the program, but for continuity purposes, I'll return to the beginning of the paragraph that we concluded with in the middle of the page 231 if you're following along in your own copy of the book. It says an immediate goal of the Roman Catholic Church, it says the church, but you know he's speaking of the Roman Catholic Church, an immediate goal of the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle East, where Christianity was born centuries before Islam became the region's dominant religion, is to promote the rights of Catholics whose safety, security, and religious freedom is threatened. Okay? Principal, immediate, most important concern of the Vatican is to protect and advance the liberties of Roman Catholics in this war-torn region, the Middle East. And you might imagine that would be the Pope's major concern. But would it be advantageous, knowing as we do what Rome eventually plans for the Middle East, the phony re-fulfillment of Daniel's 70th week, and what rights Catholics should have in it? And would it, since the Pope's main purpose is to counterfeit Daniel's 70th week on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, and would call for the need for Vatican involvement, close, intimate, personal, continual Vatican involvement in the Middle East, would it be an advantage for the Pope if Roman Catholics were persecuted in that area? Rome is willing to sacrifice her own people to gain the ends that she views most precious. The end justifies the means. And if Roman Catholics are being persecuted in the Middle East, it's only for Rome's ultimate advantage. Now, I'm making an accusation. Rome, the Vatican itself, is responsible for the persecution of Roman Catholics in the Middle East, so that it is justifiable in the world that the Vatican be so intimately involved in Middle East politics. The end game, which is the end that they most desire, is to erect the papacy as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords on the very mountain where Christ was crucified, to offer the world a counterfeit Antichrist, and then to erect the Pope as the vicar of Christ, or the replacement of the Son of God on earth, to present to the Jews the papacy as their Messiah, seeing how the Jews have rejected Christ and still reject Christ and are still waiting for their Messiah, having not understood Daniel's prophecy, Daniel chapter 9, and have rejected, because they misunderstood Daniel's prophecy, the precise timing of the coming of the Messiah was given by Daniel in chapter 9 of Daniel. And having not known the time of their visitation, the Jews still look forward in the future for their coming Messiah. And Rome intends to give them one. And it's not going to be Jesus. So they have to redo the 70th week of Daniel so convincingly that the Jews will accept whatever Rome puts up as their Messiah. Okay? So if it takes the persecution of Roman Catholics to justify Rome's and the United States' involvement in Israel, that is what Rome is more than willing to do. And so there is persecution against all Christians in the Middle East. And it's simply to justify United States and Vatican involvement. And the end game that they view, the end that they view is a counterfeit of the 70th week of Daniel. Now they intend for there to be a nation state of Israel, which they created. They intend for there to be Jews living in the land. I mean, after all, if there's going to be a Jewish temple and animal sacrifices, there must be a Jewish homeland and there must be Jews living in the land. So as a result of the First and Second World Wars, they achieved their goal. They created the need for a nation state for the Jews in the world by persecution, Jewish persecution in the First and Second World War. They caused the problem, and they had a solution in mind before it even began. And so we see Israel created in a day. And Jews, because of persecution, simply moved to Israel without the strong right arm of God, but simply out of desperation. Two objectives were met: a nation state of Israel, Jews living in the land. Now all we need is a peace treaty. Oh, after all, there must be a peace treaty because Rome has made sure Israel has been defending her very life daily ever since the creation of that state. So now there's going to be a treaty allowing the Jews to build a temple. I mean, after all, if you're going to have a refulfillment of what Jesus did 2,000 years ago, there has to be a temple. Okay? And there has to be animal sacrifices, because the Messiah causes the sacrifices and oblations to cease, right? Or rather, the Antichrist. See, I'm getting the two fulfillments mixed up. The first one, it was the Messiah who caused the sacrifices and oblations to cease when he gave up his own life. God literally ended all Temple Mount worship when he gave his son. God provided the sacrifice. But neither the Jews nor the Romans like that eventuality. They don't like Daniel's fulfillment. They don't like Daniel chapter 9, verse 23 through 27. They don't like Jesus being the Messiah. They want somebody else, a representative of Satan, to be the Messiah. So they have to have a modern nation state of Israel. They have to have Jews living in the land. There has to be a peace treaty, so there has to be perpetual war. And they provided all of it. The Vatican has provided all of it. Now, their peace treaty is going to allow the Jews to begin animal sacrifices again. Sacrifices that God will not accept now that he has given his own begotten Son. There will be no Shekinah glory standing over the Holy of Holies. There will be, that house was left to the Jews desolate when they rejected their Lamb, their Messiah, 2,000 years ago, and it will remain desolate until the consummation. So whatever blood they shed on Temple Mount, whether it be lambs or goats or sheep, whatever, doves or pigeons, it will just be blood shed. Only God will accept the blood of his own Son as an atonement for sin. That's the only blood God has ever accepted for atonement for sin. All sacrifices portrayed Christ. When he came, it was no longer necessary. To continue animal sacrifices now is a rejection of Christ. Any sacrifice is simply, whether it be the sacrifice of a lamb on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem by the Jews, or the so-called sacrifice of the Mass, is an abomination and a stench in the nostrils of God Almighty. If you want to demonstrate your rejection of the lamb which God provided, all you have to do is offer another sacrifice. When you offer another sacrifice, whether it's a lamb or a goat or a pigeon or a bull or a piece of bread, you have angered the throne of Almighty God. And you have abjectly refused the blood of Jesus Christ. That's what Rome does, and that's what the Jews are fixing to do under Roman auspices. Their failure to understand Daniel's prophecy in chapter 9 was the reason the Jews did not know the time of their visitation. And that very prophecy is the one that has confused Christianity today. They believe that fulfillment is in the future, separated by 2,000 years of time. It's the greatest deception since the Garden of Eden, and it's going to have just as much consequence in the world. Now, we've stated that over and over and over on Inquisition Update until, to my regular listeners, it's certainly become boring by now. But it is the facts that are unfolding visible on the ground today. And Rome, in order to justify more and continued interference in the Middle East and involvement by the United States, her military right arm, the American Crusaders for the Pope, there has to be persecution of quote-unquote Christians in the Middle East. The Vatican absolutely needs Christians to be persecuted in the Middle East to justify her further continued action. The United States is helping this. If Christians are dying in the Middle East, you know darn well it's the CIA that's helping it. The Catholics in action at the government, the highest government levels in this country. I said the immediate goal of the church in the Middle East, as I told you, is the refulfillment of the 70th week of Daniel, but we're not supposed to know that, see? It says the immediate goal of the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle East, where Christianity was born centuries before Islam became the region's predominant religion, is to promote the rights of Catholics whose safety, security, and religious freedom is threatened. So now you know who's threatening the safety, the security, and the religious freedom of Catholics in the Middle East. It's the CIA, it's the Vatican. If Catholics and Christians die in the Middle East, it's because the United States and the Vatican needs it. They call it a sacrifice, a worthy sacrifice, a wicked end to achieve a desirable, a wicked means to achieve a desirable end. The end justifies the means. That's the motto of the Roman Catholic Church. That's the motto of the United States government. The end justifies the means. If a future 70th week of Daniel is the end that they desire, whatever means they use to achieve it is also good. All right? It says, in standing up for religious and cultural minorities, that is, non-Catholics, the Roman Catholic Church carries the torch of liberty into places darkened by repression and violence. You ever hear so much BS? That's what it is. It says the Holy See is also a strong proponent, like the United States, of a two-state solution in Israel. Look, if you want to make absolutely certain that the Jews do not receive their Jewish Messiah 2,000 years ago, the one whom they slew, then you inundate them with daily threat of annihilation and so weary them with war that they'll sue for peace at any price. That's exactly what Rome did to the Protestants during the Revolutionary War and during the Civil War. They broke down this country. They broke it financially. They broke it spiritually by inundating them with perpetual war. And then they sued for peace at any price. And what was that price? To allow the Vatican to control the government. And all in the name of religious liberty. Let's end the fighting. Religious liberty. And what did we get? A government fashioned by Rome. And for Rome's benefit and for Rome's purpose. And that's what they intend to do in Israel with a two-state solution. Pit eternal enemies side by side in a trailer park and see what happens. You put the Hatfields and the McCoys side by side in two trailer houses not 20 feet apart and see what happens. And to put the Jews 20 feet apart, almost literally, in a two-state solution in that little piece of grand land no bigger than a postage stamp on the map. And you've got perpetual war. And that's what they've achieved. The Roman Catholic Church does not care for the benefit or welfare of Roman Catholics, nor Jews, nor Palestinians. She only cares about destroying God's creation and making sure that the Jews and the Protestants miss the time of their visitation. It's just incredible what's happening. And it's so vividly clear in my mind, I just sometimes find it difficult to describe the most obvious. It says, in standing up for religious and cultural minorities, if you're a religious and cultural minority, do you want the Vatican standing up for your rights? Worse yet, do you want Rome to establish what your rights are? That's what she's doing. In standing up for religious and cultural minorities, the church carries the torch of liberty. Isn't that what they said during the Revolutionary War? Liberty? You know what liberty stands for in Rome? I've told you over and over. It means liberty for Roman Catholics to practice their diabolical religion without interference. It means that the government guarantees full liberty to Roman Catholics to worship the man of sin as he sees fit and to do it in the name of Christ. The Roman Catholic Church carries the torch of liberty into places darkened by repression and violence. Oh, how wonderful when Rome causes the repression and the violence in the first place. Problem, reaction, solution. Rome causes the problem and she's ready with the solution. It says the Holy See is also a strong proponent, just like the United States. What you have is there is the beast and the image of the beast. That's why they're proponents, co-proponents of a two-state solution for Israel. Rome is the beast, the United States is just the image of the beast. You can't tell them apart. And they both want Jacob and Esau at each other's throats continually. Because Rome's got a plan for the Middle East. A plan to deceive the whole world. And nobody dare have time to figure out what's going on. A strong proponent like the United States of a two-state solution in Israel. Not only would such an arrangement between Israelis and Palestinians do much for peace in the region, but it would also help protect and preserve holy sites of Bethlehem and Nazareth. Oh, how important that must be to quote-unquote Christians. As I ended the program yesterday, I told you in the Bible it says, Jesus said, your house is left unto you desolate. And that's when the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords walked out of that facility for the last time. That's what made it desolate. Jesus walked out, and with him the Father. And if that wasn't enough to get the message across to the Christ-rejecting Jews, God had the 10th Legion of the Roman army destroy that temple. Not one stone remained. God was not going to allow the Jews to remain in that land and continue animal sacrifices once he made the supreme sacrifice himself. So, if the temple is not holy, because that which is holy, that made it holy, has left the building, what holiness is there in anything called holy in Jerusalem? But Rome's all concerned about these holy sites. Why? Because they're going to be necessary to fulfill a phony refulfillment of the 70th week of Daniel. That which Jesus fulfilled 2,000 years ago perfectly and completely. And the whole purpose of it is to promote to the world a false Christ. To promote to the Jews a false Christ. To promote to apostate Protestantism a false Christ. Your government, the government of the United States of America, is working hand in hand with the Vatican to present to you a false Christ. You know, some of you are beginning to perceive that the government of the United States initiated a war against the citizenry of the United States on 9/11. Some of you are wise enough to comprehend that what happened on 9/11 would not have been possible were it not for the direct involvement of the government of this country. But that's only half the story. Your government has been waging war against your spiritual life almost since the founding of this country by allowing Rome to fashion it, by allowing Rome to pass her canon law in the form of civil law, in the form of making the seminaries of this country preach futurism to promote a future antichrist when he's been with us all the time. I'm sorry I'm not making much progress in the book this morning, but I have to make sure my listeners understand what this author is talking about. To wade through all the smoke and the mirrors and the phony piousness so your eyes will be open. We'll be back right after the message. Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update, and I'm going to get right back to the text of the book here. Not only would a two-state solution between the Israelis and the Palestinians do much for peace in the region, it would also help protect and preserve the holy sites of Bethlehem and Nazareth, which mean at least as much to Christians as they do to Jews or Muslims. They're not holy sites. They're not holy. They're buildings. Temporal buildings that are going to be destroyed and replaced by a new kingdom, a new heaven, and a new earth. Jesus left the temple in Jerusalem desolate. So what holiness remains in those buildings? Those so-called holy sites? None. None. And here's something else, and I wasn't even going to go into this morning, but if my recollection is correct, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, you biblical scholars out there, those who are more read and understood in the scriptures than even I, my recollection seems to recall that when the mother of Jacob and Esau died, Jacob and Esau met once again, face to face. The mortal enemies, Jacob and Esau, met face to face at their mother's funeral, and they buried the hatchet. Now, somebody can locate book, chapter, and verse for that, if you please. But I've read it, and somehow I recall it, that when Esau and Jacob met at their mother's funeral, they buried the hatchet. No longer was there enmity between Esau and Jacob. Who re-incited that hatred? And for what purpose? Do you need me to tell you? Thanks to the diplomacy of Rome. Rome needs a controversy in the Middle East so she can fulfill her phony 70th week of Daniel. What better controversy, what more guaranteed controversy could there be but the re-inflammation of the enmity that was done away with between Esau and Jacob? And so Rome created Islam and then pitted it against Jacob. The Bible tells me that Jacob and Esau buried the hatchet when they buried their mother. So who lit the flame of hatred between the Jews and the Palestinians and the Arabs? Rome did. It was absolutely necessary. And there's your two-state solution. You got to have it to justify the greatest deception since the Garden of Eden. It's all of Rome's creation. It's all of Rome's making. The end justifies the means. When Jacob and Esau are at war, Rome wins. And the United States, your government is helping it. And your pastor behind your apostate Protestant church is helping it. You've been deceived morning, noon, and night. You've been deceived cradle to grave. From cradle to grave, you have been deceived. If you are from my generation, you have never been told the truth. Not from the news media, not from the government, not from your pastor. You can't get more deceived. A two-state solution. And they're going to try to justify this to unify all these people under a false Christ because of their mutual love for buildings that are not holy, sites that are not holy. Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and the so-called holy sites, which Jesus plainly said with his own mouth were left desolate. But it just motivates every Christian of every color in this country, even the anti-Christian church, Roman Catholicism. You can't get more deceived. He says the Holy See has played a little known but significant role in attempting to broker peace in the Middle East. You better believe it's little known, and it's even more misunderstood what role the Vatican has played in the name of peace in the Middle East to destroy God's heritage in this world. To destroy us physically, to destroy us spiritually. Both Jew and Gentile. And it's time we get a grip. Now, I've finally made it up to where I ended yesterday. It says, looking beyond the Middle East. Oh, yeah, it's a global New World Order. We have to look beyond the Middle East now. Looking beyond the Middle East, there are many areas of the world in these early years of the 21st century where the Catholic Church, especially if backed by American, quote-unquote, goodwill. You know what goodwill is? I'm going to tell you what American goodwill is. From the Vatican's point of view, that the apostate Protestants who believe in futurism, who have renounced their Protestantism, who have renounced their former belief, their true belief that the papacy is the Antichrist, now believe in a fairy tale, a future Antichrist, since they are so ignorant, since they are so apostate, since they have so thoroughly debased themselves, since we have proven them lock, stock, and barrel to be a lot of fools, then they deserve nothing but to be slaves for the Roman pontiff. And so Rome authorizes the government to tax the heretics to death. Oppress them in every way. Lie to them at every stroke. Confiscate their wealth in the name of taxation and use it to finance papal proxy wars all over the world, to finance this futurist fulfillment in Israel. And make them think it's their idea. Are you starting to feel foolish? That's what Rome calls your goodwill. Doesn't it make you feel good to pay your taxes? Doesn't it make you feel good to go to church on Sunday and listen to all this cockamamie futurist lies? You're a real good Christian if you obey the civil power. You're a real good Christian if you go to Sunday school on Sunday and pay your tithes and offerings to your papist pastor and believe his futurist lies. Pay your taxes and dutifully march off to crusades around the world. Pay with your blood and your guts and your soul to advance the papacy. And all your hope is in Jerusalem now. Well, I'm telling you, if it's an earthly Jerusalem, it's the wrong Jerusalem. If it's a physical temple that you desire, you're going to get one, but you're going to lose your soul in the process. And you can thank your government. And you can thank the papists that run it. And you can thank the papist media that keeps you in delusion. And you can thank your apostate papal pastor. That's how they define American goodwill. You become a peaceful slave, a willing slave, debasing yourself every time you lift a finger. From the time you open your first eyelid in the morning until you close it at night, you must serve the Roman Pontiff. That's American goodwill. So we got to look past the Middle East. Oh yeah, that's the final act, the final scene. The stage has been set, but it's got to be a global deception now. And thanks to American goodwill, we can make a positive impact. One of the most important of these is Africa. Oh, yes, Africa. We have to conquer Africa for the Roman Pontiff. It says Africa, where the Pope, whether Francis or his successor, will likely be an important moderating influence in the 21st century. Moderating? Moderating influence? Why do you think the Pope has to moderate anything in Africa? Because with the help of the Jesuits, the Roman Catholic CIA, the Catholics in action, have armed all of the violent factions in Africa. Wherever Rome controls, there is war. To get the people so preoccupied with war that they can't see what's going on behind the curtain. You ever heard the term the theater of war? It's a distraction. And no way better to distract somebody than to give them the belief that their life is in jeopardy. That there are enemies surrounding them. That you're outgunned and outarmed and you have no hope but to defend yourself by your very blood. That's what they've done in Africa. Now, since the theater of war is now acting itself out in Africa, what do you suppose Rome's doing? Well, wherever there's Rome, or rather wherever there's war, there's need for Roman mediation, Roman diplomacy. You see, what went on in the United States during the Revolutionary War, what's going on in Israel right now, all the wars in Israel, what's going on in all the wars in Africa is to just justify the Pope's intervention. The United States and the papal intervention. Because it's a global new world order. And Africa just happens to be a place to mop up for the Pope. Africa, where the Pope, whether it's Pope Francis I or his successor, will likely be an important moderating influence in the 21st century. That's what we need, the Pope to moderate. The Antichrist of the Bible, the man of sin, the son of perdition, to moderate all conflicts in the world. Why? Because they're her conflicts. She creates the conflicts. She arms both sides of the combatants. And while they're busy defending themselves against rape and torture and fire and bullets and bombs and swords and pitchforks and whatever weapon she can provide them with, Rome's stealing the farm. with the help of the United States of America. Your goodwill is financing it. Your papist goodwill is financing it. And you feel like such a good Christian. Holy and pious. You know, the Bible says, thou shalt not kill. It's pretty simple, isn't it? So if somebody puts you in a situation where you have to kill, then what spirit is that power led by? Pretty simple, isn't it? Even a child could understand it. Thou shalt not kill. It's common sense to a true God-fearing, Bible-believing Christian. So if you're put in a situation where you must kill or be killed, who put you in that position? That's a good question for the Africans to ask right now. That would have been a good question for the Protestants of the colonial America to ask themselves. That would have been a good question for the Brits to ask themselves when they were racked by 3 civil wars. That's a good question for the Jews to ask themselves. Who has put us in a position of war? And for what purpose? You know what? We've got 2,000 years of Roman history that we can study if we have the ambition, the desire, the drive, the gift, the spirit to investigate, and you can come to no other conclusion but that the great warmonger of the world is the papacy. And who would we expect but the man of sin and the son of perdition that says, thou shalt kill. And if you won't kill, I'll put you in jeopardy morning, noon, and night from your enemies. I'll force you to kill. I'll finance your killing. And it'll all benefit me. So Africa is the theater of war right now. And the Middle East, it's a global endeavor to create a global government. The world must be distracted by war so that Rome can do her bidding undetected. The greatest ally of a criminal is to have a distraction. Something to attend all the attention of the people away from the crime that's being committed. And the world has fallen for it example after example after example after example for the last 1,800 years. And I'm going to talk about all those examples here on Inquisition Update, should God give me breath and life long enough to do it. Yeah, Rome creates all the wars, all the problems. And whether it's Pope Francis I or one of his successors, the papacy will likely, oh yes, indeed, will be an important moderating influence in the 21st century because the Pope needs war to justify his involvement. You see, a world at peace has no advantage for the man of war. Because war is the motivating factor for change. The Roman Catholic Church makes no advancement at all in the world. The man of sin makes no advancement at all in the world unless there is war. It's through war, killing, that she advances her global agenda. You can't conquer the world by the man of peace. It takes the man of war to conquer the world. And you have him. The papacy. The Antichrist. He says Islam remains the dominant organized religion in much of Africa. Who'd have thunk it? It used to be Christians. The gospel had been spread to Africa. Christian churches, Bible-believing Christian churches, Protestant churches in nature, sprung up all over Africa, the northern part, except right all along the Mediterranean coast. Rome was losing ground every day in Africa. So Rome created Islam and made a deal with the Muslims. You conquer Jerusalem for me and give it me, and I'll let you have all of Africa. And that's why today Africa is Islamic. Rome wanted Jerusalem. Why does Rome want Jerusalem? Because she's going to phony up the 70th week of Daniel. It's been her plan all along. And who would have prevented her? Who in close proximity could have prevented her from doing that? The Bible-believing Christians in northern Africa. They had to be destroyed. So the papacy incited the ancient hatred between Esau and Jacob. Fired up the excitable Muslims. And then made a diabolical deal with them. You conquer for me Jerusalem, and I'll give you all of Africa. And that's how it went down in history. Rome still covets Jerusalem more than anything in the world. Jerusalem, where Christ died for us. He seeks to propose to us another Christ, a false Christ. Islam remains the dominant organized religion in much of Africa, but Christianity is a close second. I'll tell you who's a close second. Roman Catholicism. Jesuit-inspired Roman Catholicism. South Africa is not Protestant. It's Roman Catholic. And says, and Catholicism is deeply rooted. You better believe she's deeply rooted in Africa. In the 20th century, the Catholic population in Africa grew from less than 2 million to 130 million. Today, according to some estimates, as many as 185 million Catholics live on the continent, and countries like Uganda, Nigeria are overflowing with seminarians and priests, just like colonial America. After John Carroll helped us get our Constitution, the Jesuits were free to come to this country. They've run it ever since. Of course, this author doesn't admit they're Jesuits, but he does admit they are seminarians and priests. He says this is a bright spot for the Roman Catholic Church. Yeah, dark Africa, where the gospel was denied, has now become a bright spot for the papacy. Good news for Africa, where the Roman Catholic Church has given great material and spiritual aid to end poverty, illiteracy, disease, and war. Well, it worked in the United States. Why wouldn't it work in Africa? You see, the agent of the papacy is the government. And if the government can enslave you with promises of an education to alleviate poverty and illiteracy, if it offers you benefits, you're going to take them, and that is how Rome gets control. You take anything from the federal government, and Rome has you lock, stock, and barrel. It worked in America. Americans still haven't figured it out, so we still have a chance to use the same diabolical system in Africa, and that's exactly what they're going to do. In the name of alleviating poverty and illiteracy and disease and war, Rome is going to, every one of those are distractions, and Rome is going to use them to enslave the people. It says, Caritas Internationalis, the Catholic charity organization, is a leading and necessary presence in humanitarian emergencies in Darfur. That's right. You're going to get everything from Catholic charities. And oh yes, there's going to be strings attached, just like there is here in the United States of America. And if you protest against the Roman horde, you're going to be labeled a heretic and persecuted every step you take. But we've got to take a stand. Absolutely, our lives and our souls demand it. Take a stand against the Antichrist of the Bible. The papacy